Around this time last year, we launched some language to help shape our sense of who we are as a church, and that was coming out of these verses here in 1 Peter chapter 2. As you come to him, the living stone rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And from here, we isolated three key themes. We were talking about being a community heading toward Jesus as you come to him, a community who are with one another. You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, and a community who are for the world, to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And we were saying that just as these were words that were written to inspire and to give shape to an ancient church back in the first century, so too we were sensing God's leading to lean into them together as a community here today at Mahangaru Bridge Baptist Church, and helping to motivate some of our own thinking and action as a community heading into the future. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of just going over where we've been in this space and kind of rehashing a little bit of this. When we were talking about toward Jesus, we were looking initially, I think, at that scene in John's Gospel where Jesus appears in John chapter 1, and John the Baptist points him out to his disciples, and they approach Jesus and he asks them, what do you want? And then in response to their question about where he's staying, he gives them this invitation, come and see. And we were talking about how the point of Christian discipleship is like the crossroads of those two things. The question, what do you want? And the invitation, come and you will see. We were talking about how there are any number of things in the world that we might want, that we might move towards, to invest ourselves into, to go and see and to experience, but that in the church, this is all about ihukaraiti. This is all about Jesus Christ. This is all about the living stone. And so first up, before anything else, we were saying, and it's just obvious stuff, because we're a church, unapologetically, we are about Jesus here at Mahangaru Bridge Baptist Church. We're about learning to understand ourselves and our world through him, through gospel, through good news of a God who in love draws close to us and invites us to walk with him. And there's that implied movement in that idea as well, toward Jesus. It is about movement. It's about growth. It's about making sure then that this is a place where people have the opportunity to hear for the first time the gospel story. It's about making sure that this is a place where people have the opportunity to take those important steps of kind of affirmation of their faith in spaces like baptism. It's about creating spaces where, for us as a community, we go together on this lifelong journey of following in the footsteps of Jesus. This is core business for the church. A few weeks back, you'll remember that we took part in the church life survey, and it was so helpful. As a pastor, I carry a narrative in my head, like the story in my head is a story of all the gaps. When I'm thinking about us as a church, a lot of the time I'm just thinking about all of the ways in which I'm falling short, or I'm not doing enough, or we're not doing enough, and there's all of these things that need to be done, and we would be better if X, Y, and Z. But actually, the data from that survey has helped me tell a different story in my head. We've got a little team who are kind of looking at the data in a bit more kind of an in-depth way, but just on first impressions, we found out that out of the 66 adults who responded, 90% of those responding said that they felt that this church was resourcing their spiritual journey well. 87.7% responded that our church is usually or nearly always helping them to grow in their understanding of God. Over 95% of the respondents felt that they had grown at least a little bit in their faith over the last year, either through this church or through their own personal study or engagement with other Christian groups. pretty amazing, hey? I mean, it doesn't tell the whole story, and that's not just going like cherry picking for the good ones. Like that's kind of, it's hard to be casting a cynical eye over it. Like there isn't a lot to affirm what I would want to think naturally, I suppose. And so, be encouraged. This is a space where people are growing. Hear that this morning. That's just a really cool story. I said last year, I think when we were looking at this theme, our hope is that our church would be a place where people are able to show up just as they are, to find not a bunch of holier-than-thou do-gooders, but rather fellow strugglers who live in the humility of those who know their own weakness, people who embody vulnerability with themselves and with God and with one another, such that anybody might find a place of welcome here to respond to that same invitation into a new way of life. So when we're talking about Jesus, this has kind of been the flavor in the conversation toward Jesus. And then the second theme, with one another. You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, Peter writes. And we've looked at this in a bunch of different ways. We've been reminded that, like just as it was in the garden back at the beginning, it's not good for the man to be alone, God says there. Community is kind of the default. We've been expressing it again this morning, just as I said up here before. God's hand upon a family, which become a nation. God works through them for his glory, to share something of who he is to the world. Into the New Testament, where the disciples of Jesus are called into community. They are sent in community. And then you have the church, which is this kind of community by default. It's by your love and your care for one another that the world will know that you belong to me, Jesus says. And then this idea of togetherness as a powerful testimony to who God is, it plays out across the New Testament. And we've kind of already mentioned this one again this morning, the body of Christ in 1 Corinthians 12, where it's the parts together that make the whole, where there's no hierarchy. No one part is more important than any other. No part is unnecessary. We have those images of the early church in the book of Acts with that really challenging communal life that they share, where faith is worked out in community, where everybody contributes and plays a part. The church is a community by default. Just as the church is a place of movement towards Jesus, there's a growth and connection with others who are on the same journey as well, which is necessary to walking the journey well. And so we want to be a community by default here at Māngere Bridge Baptist Church, that it's not so much about me and Jesus, but it's about us and Jesus. We've got some of that Baptist whakapapa on our side as well in the mix, because Baptist ecclesiology, Baptist ideas of what the church look like, it's fundamentally communal. We operate not with a hierarchy, with like a pope or like an anointed apostolic leader or someone kind of sitting on the top. It's rather kind of like the other way around, like an inverted triangle. It's as a community where the voice of God is heard in our togetherness as we gather, in our listening together, in our being together, where we exercise decision-making communally, not just by ourselves, but we do it together, where we express our togetherness and covenanting to one another, as we've kind of expressed this morning with the membership piece. And I guess where our life together is not just about 90 minutes on a Sunday morning, but it's about how we then go out from here and share in life together and the reality of our day-to-day out there in the world as well. So community by default, but also community where our difference is seen not as a threat, but as a strength. I've said it lots of times. Andrew Urquhart pointed out on the background of the slides last year. I slightly updated the rock wall for the background this year, but it's it's not a wall of bricks. It's not a wall of sameness. It's not a wall of like everyone has to be exactly the same so that we can build a strong wall. It's a wall of difference. It's all of these individual pieces, different shapes and sizes and colors, and they're all being built together by a master craftsman into something beautiful, into this body, this temple. So community by default, in which people and their unique identity are contributing. Jeanette actually shared a beautiful picture with me of that last week. She was, she was. I hope you don't mind me sharing that. Yeah. She just a sense in worship last Sunday where she had this image of like a fruit bowl. And you know how the fruit bowls at home, well, at least ours, put the bananas in, and like 2 days later, everything's just gone all brown, and it's kind of, but not like that. She had this image of a fruit bowl with just all of these beautiful different kinds of fruit, and all of them were just at peak, like pickability, like peak ripeness, and they weren't deteriorating. Nothing was going bad. They were just all in there together, and there was something beautiful in that. And I just think that's a beautiful picture of what the church can be and all of its potential, all of us flourishing. All of us in our diversity and contributing to something super tasty, like it's really cool. So last year we were talking about it like this. The gentle reminder of Scripture is that Christian life is about a movement towards one another, that it's more than just about me and Jesus, it's about us and Jesus. It's not just about what I'm becoming, it's about who we are becoming together. And in a context like ours, which places such high value on independence as strength, and yet at the same time experiences such extreme damage from isolation and loneliness, there's a crucially interlinked, built together, fruit bowl tastiness quality that is just as important and relevant for us today. It is not good for man to be alone was the word in the beginning, and so it remains true for us here and now. We cannot be built unless we're together. And again, Christian Life Survey, Christian Life Survey, was super encouraging with this. 87% of respondents said that they had a strong sense of belonging as part of this haere. Perhaps more encouragingly, 57% of that 87% had a strong sense of belonging that was growing. Like they said, yes, I've got a strong sense of belonging, but it's growing deeper in this space. 83% of us would be happy to invite along a friend or relative who didn't attend this church. I mean, that says a lot about who we think we are, right? If we think, hey, this is a safe place to bring people I love. 74% regularly involved in some type of group activity. 89% said that either to a small extent or some extent or a great extent were encouraged to use their gifts here. 89% said that this was a church that was inclusive of different kinds of people. So again, by one metric, one kind of measure, there's something encouraging here. We are doing bits of with one another really well. Be encouraged. There's some cool stuff happening here in this space. And then our final theme for the world, to be a holy priesthood offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And this is how we were talking about this. In the temple, the priests were set apart to offer worship to God through the offer of sacrifices, but this wasn't something that they did just for their own edification, for their own benefit. It was on behalf of the community around them. Peter takes this imagery and talks about these living stones being gathered together to be a holy priesthood who offer not sacrifices, but spiritual sacrifices, i.e. it's like their full worship, their lives offered as living sacrifices in the language of Paul in Romans 12, poured out on behalf of those around them. I mean, we might think of the Old Testament book of Micah, for example. Micah writes there, what shall I bring to the Lord? Shall I bring him burnt offerings, calves a year old? Will the Lord be blessed with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? And then no, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Those are spiritual sacrifices. That's what we're talking about here. It's the all-important reminder that the church is a people who are set apart, not for holy huddles, not for just coming in and, I'm feeling good about ourselves, but actually with an outward-facing orientation. We are gathered together for a purpose, and it's to face outwards together. We exist for the world. This last theme, it takes for granted that God is a God of mission, that mission isn't something that the church just kind of made up to get busy, but that God is the one with a mission, that that God's mission has extended across history, across the biblical narrative. God has never stopped persisting in seeking after people, has never ceased chasing us, has never abandoned us to the messiness of our reality, but persists in seeking after us for wholeness and restoration. It's the story of the New Testament, it's the story of Jesus, it's the story of the New Testament church as well. Chris Wright puts it like this: fundamentally, our mission, if it is biblically informed and validated, means our committed participation as God's people, at God's invitation and command, in God's own mission within the history of God's world for the redemption of God's creation. It's not about us, it's about what God is doing. God is doing all of these things. It's all God's stuff, and we're just privileged that God says, hey, I'd really love all of you guys to be a part of that as well. Would you come and join in together with me? I'm doing something cool. I'm restoring things. I'm redeeming things. I'm doing a good work. Come and play a part in that. That is what God calls us into again today. One of the things I wanted to be really careful about here, though, is making sure that we're looking at images of mission that are helpful for us in our context as we think this through, because sometimes it can be a little bit like this in the church, where we come into these spaces and we almost imagine like no time has passed between us and Jesus and the disciples, and so we're kind of like we're just following Jesus around, kind of doing Jesus ministry, and we think about that context and we kind of apply it directly to here. We might be kind of like the early church in the first part of Acts, where ministry and mission take place primarily within a context where there is a context for the Jesus story. It's almost like the Jesus story is a sequel to a book that everyone's already read, back then. Today, we can't take for granted the fact that anybody's read the first half of the book. We can't have that same kind of, even in terms of our society being a broadly religious one. There isn't that same affinity. It's not even necessarily the same as, like Paul in Athens, where he goes and kind of finds that angle with, all of the idols and then the unknown God, and kind of steps in with that. And so, our statistics only further underline that we're living in a fundamentally different space in Aotearoa today. And that can feel really disempowering and discouraging until we realize that actually we're not left alone with that. And there are some really beautiful images in Scripture that help to encourage us, I think, in terms of where we are. We looked at Jeremiah 29, this letter written to exiles ripped from their homes, taken off into Babylon, living in a foreign land, surrounded by people with a fundamentally different worldview. And this encouragement then comes to them from God through the prophet Jeremiah. Not to double down, not to set up walls, not to live in fear and opposition to the culture around them, but instead build houses, settle down, plant gardens, eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Seek the peace, seek the shalom, the prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if that place prospers, then you will prosper as well. And this is what participating in God's mission looked like in this point in time for God's people. For a generation, 70 plus years. Get stuck in Babylon. Make it your home. Entrust your children to Babylon, and then seek the peace, seek the shalom, seek the flourishing of that place. Pray for it. Pray for it, not to be overthrown, not to become Jewish, but pray for it to prosper. Because if it prospers, then you will prosper as well. And then we looked at how that same language actually carried forward centuries into 1 Peter as well, as just following on from our kind of anchor verses, where the sort of exile language plays out in the life of the early church. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to Abstain from sinful desire which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives amongst the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us. Submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor or as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the talk of ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God and honor the emperor. Again, a church on the margins of empire, a church facing oppression, in this context where there's someone on the throne who is seen as Lord and worshipped as God in circles of that empire, a messianic figure, in a context where persecution and oppression are part of the everyday. What do? Do we fight back against it? Do we get upset? No. Focus on doing good. Respect people. Be known for doing good things. Get on with living and let your witness take care of itself. And certainly over centuries, that patient ferment in the life of the early church just bore rich fruit. A church went from being on the margins of the empire to right at the heart of the empire, which had all of its own problems associated with it. But it was in that life of faithful witness and good deeds that the church flourished. And so, if we look at the right images in Scripture, then we can be encouraged for where we are today. There is just a rich history to sit on and to be encouraged by as the church in our time. And so we want to be a community which is learning to understand our place again in the world. And perhaps that's going to require some learning and some humility. Humility is a good word, I think, for mission in our space today. But also then a space where we're being encouraged to engage with imagination in what God is doing, because God is at work. God is doing stuff in the streets and in the world around us. With the Church Life Survey, we can see that 76% of respondents said that they felt comfortable talking about their faith. 56% of those who responded are already involved in some kind of wider, more widely connected community group outside of this church. 97% agreed that environmental issues were important for Christians. There's a real cool potential in the mix here at Mānguru Bridge Baptist Church. We are a community who are thinking outward together. And so toward Jesus, with one another, for the world. I guess the reason for wanting to run through all of this again on AGM Sunday is that, firstly, this is another useful checkpoint. I said similarly to the elders when we met together over this. It's an opportunity for us to stop again and say, yes, this is consistent with how we imagine things here. This is the kind of community that we are sensing God's leading in becoming, and who we are hopeful of growing together towards. And as much as possible, I really do believe that it is about our sense together of who God is shaping us to be. It's not just the pastors and the elders kind of standing up and going, this is who we are, get in line or get out kind of thing. This is about us discerning it together. And so a little bit later in the second half of our AGM time after morning tea, there'd be an opportunity here for you to just offer any comment or anything into this space. Have some time to think about it. I'd be interested in hearing your feedback then, or in the weeks ahead as well. This is not just about the leadership of this church. It's about us together. It's about who we sense God is shaping us to be. And I guess the second reason for bringing all of this out again today is that if these are the areas that we're sensing God's shaping for us in, then, they motivate mahi for the year ahead as well. Last year, when talked about this language, it was all kind of super fresh. It had been the product of long conversation that kind of crystallized just a couple of weeks out from the AGM. And so with the elders, I got super excited and I was like, here's all of the stuff that we need to do now. And I just wrote this like massive long list of all of these things that needed to happen, and most of it was just about things I needed to do. It was just like, here's a rod for my own back for me to beat myself up with for a whole year, and that's kind of been what it's like, Graham? And I've still got a lot to get on with. Don't worry, you do employ me for a reason. But if this is about us and who we are together, then there has to be some invitations for all of us, hey, in this space too. And so if you get the newsletter, you'll realize that there are quite a lot of invitations into different things in the life of our church. We got gaps. We got gaps in Bridge Kids out there right now. We would love some leaders in that space to go and be part of that team. We've got gaps in Bridge Crew. Luke would love some support in that space. He would love some people to walk alongside him and help to flesh that out. We've got gaps in worship. We would love more people to come in and be part of that team. Rosalie would love to hear from you. We've got ministries that are flourishing and just need a few more supporters in the space as well. Think about mainly music, which just, we have such a large number of community people in here on a Thursday every single week, and we're singing, well, I'm not singing because I'm sitting in the office, but there's Jesus songs and there's all of this stuff kind of going on. It's just this beautiful expression of kind of like, hey, we've opened our building and all these, families are coming in here. Alyssa and the team would love some support. We need people in those spaces, but I want to just add 3 more to the list this morning. 3 invitations flowing on from some of this stuff. And the first one is under the category of toward Jesus. And in this category, I'm looking for a team of people who would like to come together around this idea of doing an annual or biannual Intro to Christianity type course in the life of our church. This would be a group who would decide on what that course would look like in conversation with the pastoral team. It might just be Alpha, but I didn't want to assume that it would just be Alpha, something like that. And who would then be set free to organize it and run it, either annually or biannually, as a kind of way of providing space for people who want to learn about the fundamental basics of the Christian faith. Because having an Intro to Christianity course here running suggests that we think that people who are not Christians or maybe just kind of at the start of that journey might actually be coming through the door, that it's not just about, a whole bunch of people who've got it all sorted, but actually there's space for people to come and learn and grow from the very beginning. And so I'd love it if you would have a prayerful think about that, and if that sounds like an area where you would like to serve, then there is a sign-up sheet out there on the information desk. Chuck your name down there. I'd love to hear from you and get in touch about that. It would be awesome to be able to have this running as just a regular piece of who we are at Māngere Bridge Baptist Church. Second invitation, under the theme of For the World. One of the most exciting annual events that we've run here is the Halloween block party, disco party, used to be called the Light Party. There's DJ Mitch, who we said goodbye to last week. Oh, I wonder if, I don't know, maybe he could come back. We participate in something that our community engages really heavily in the Halloween space and the trick-or-treating space by just providing like a positive space for people as they're just kind of walking past. It's historically had bouncy castles and games and sausage sizzles and like a dance floor and just a whole bunch of awesome stuff. And it's just a privilege for us as a church to open this space up and go, hey, how can we bless you? How can we be part of what you're doing? How can we be part of just doing good things here in our community? And so I'm looking for a key coordinator or co-coordinators and a team who can take this one on. It'd look like developing the theme for the night and then being responsible for all of the bits and pieces, kind of the health and safety and just the program and the team of volunteers. A lot of that stuff has been established already. Rosalie and Michelle done a lot of work in terms of just getting some of that stuff ironed out. And so there's a bit of a pack sort of to pass on, Michelle, like in that space. But we need key people to run it. And if we don't have key people to run it, then it can't run. It's as simple as that. And we had I don't know how many hundred people, kids from our community through here last year, like up to almost 500 or something, I think people were saying. It goes off. And so it would just be awesome to have a group who gather in around this event and just keep it as an annual reality in the life of our church. Just a very, it's a one-off event, but a very significant one, I think. And so again, there's a sign-up sheet out there on the information desk. If that's you, please put your name down, and I'd love to be able to start that conversation as we look towards the end of October. Third invitation, and this one is considering all three of those themes, because I think if there's one place where the wheels get put on the spiritual growth, the with one anotherness, and the lived out for the world kind of bit of the Christian faith, it's not going to be here in 90 minutes on a Sunday morning. Rather, it's going to be going deeper on all of these sorts of conversations through the course of a week. And we have a number of connect groups that run already in the life of our church, but I'm really keen that we start to look at setting up a few more and building our capacity. So I'm wondering, do you have space to open your home for a couple of hours each week, maybe a couple of hours each fortnight? Do you have space to be able to host people and to be able to go on that journey of toward Jesus and with one another and for the world, and kind of doing a little bit of that life together stuff? Over the last year or so, every single week, we've put questions for conversation and discussion in the newsletter related to the sermon from Sunday. And it's really my heart that we would have more groups in our church that are kind of taking the conversations on Sunday and then going out and applying them into daily life. So we're kind of not doing this disjointed thing, but we're kind of following on together and kind of learning to embody some of the things that we talk about. And so that resource is already there. You have the material. There'll be a commitment to meeting together with you on a regular basis to see how it's going and helping you to kind of iron out any issues and doing all of that stuff. But do you have space to open your home to help us to increase our capacity as a church in this area? Again, there is a sign-up sheet out there on the information desk, and I'd love to talk more. It's not an instant commitment, just a commitment to conversation. So 3 invitations for 3 key areas. Intro to Christianity course, disco party, connect groups. Are those things that you might be being prompted by God to get stuck in on here at our church? But then just also to signal 2 conversations just in closing. And this is, I guess, kind of thinking about how the elders are going to be focusing some of their work in the governance space in the year ahead. And hopefully in time, these will be conversations that others in our church will be drawn into as well. Firstly, with respect to mission, we're going to be talking about how best to take us as a church on a journey of understanding our positioning in mission today. This theme of mission kept on coming up time and time again in our church forum just a few months back. There was I think probably one of the most persistent themes there in terms of what is God saying to us as a church was how are we connecting to our local community, and expressed in a whole bunch of different ways. It just came up time and time again. And so I'm really interested in kind of going on a journey of asking how we might do that well together. And I guess positioning and mission, I'm thinking both locally, but also for this particular cultural moment. Because the gospel has deep roots in the whenua here. It has deep roots that go back far, far further than we do. There is a story of the gospel on this land that as a church we need to go on a journey of understanding together. And it's a necessary humility that I think we need to learn. Part of the one of the outputs in the church forum, I think at that time, was about learning to be good treaty partners. And Learning to be good treaty partners is part of that is about learning stories of the land. It's about understanding where we are. It's about sitting in humility together. And so when we're talking about what we go to do, I'm concerned that we understand firstly what has already been. I think it's important. There's a humility piece that we need to learn. And then there's the wider cultural bit that I think fits into that as well. Where are we at this point in time as the church? And so how do we enter into it? That's going to be in the mix in the eldership space in the months ahead. And then the second conversation, and again, this was heard in the church forum, and it had a lot of traction pre-COVID. It feels time to kind of resurface and be intentional about looking at our physical footprint here as a church again, because there are increasing demands on our space, and probably the right time to start again on this one was yesterday. We are growing, and that's a really positive, awesome thing. That's super, super cool. But that means that we need to think about, is this footprint that we have at the moment, is it going to keep working well for us into the future, or do we need to start doing some mahi here and now to set ourselves up well? And so we're going to be thinking about what our needs are and how our needs intersect with some of this vision stuff as an eldership in the months ahead. Take the learning from 1 Peter 2 really seriously. I mean, this is just a building. We are the church, but still there's a necessary korero to enter into in this space too. So just to signal, those are some spaces that we're going to be getting into in the next little while as a governance group, and you can expect to hear back from us, and you can expect to hold us accountable for those conversations. That's why I'm kind of airing them publicly up here this morning, so you can ask and say, hey, how's that one going? Tell us about what's going on there. Hope Fia and Mel, if you guys are successful with your eldership nominations today, I hope you're up for that. Yep, that's part of what it's going to be. So, cool. In closing, and thank you for listening to this, and thank you for taking time just to sit in this space again. I just want to say how genuinely encouraged and blessed I feel to be serving as a pastor here at this church. Just such a very real sense of God at work in this space amongst us as people, and the stories that we get to share with one another most weeks, and the stories that I hear through the week. Think about the people that God is weaving into the story. There are just such special people that are expressed again this morning, being woven into the life of this church. There are amazing initiatives already happening through the people in this church. This is a special place. I'm really encouraged. I'm really excited about the future here, and I hope that you are as well. I hope that you feel that. And so I wanted us to close by coming back to our anchor verses again in 1 Peter 2, and this time written for us to say again together. And so would you stand with me? And I've turned the eyes to we's. We've lost it. Sorry. That's coming back again. Cool. 1 Peter 2, verses 4 and 5. Let's say these together. As we come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, we, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Amen.